Hey nerds, we are going over XMen 97. This is the fourth episode, split into two parts within a 20-minute span, starting now. Welcome to the Nerd Social. I am Colin.
And I'm David.
So, like I mentioned in the preview, this was a two-parter actually. We got to see two separate stories instead of just one big story that happened. And I just want to hear your thoughts, David, on what you think of this fourth episode of X-Men 97.
I liked it, but this is a letdown for me. After the first three episodes was a good start, basically, for the revival of the series. But I'm a little biased because I don't really like these multi-part episodes, even though the point of it is for story development on a few characters. But it's just you have to wait for next week for the next episode for the conclusion of that storyline. But I'd say it's just a little letdown, but it's still good though.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, there's some really interesting parts to it, even though I got distracted by the two-parter. I didn't think that it would be just a quick, short story. You get into the second story, and then you're like, oh, it's already over? And it didn't take that long. So, yeah, it just left in a very kind of a weird space. The first part of the story was very enjoyable. I think it was very nostalgic in some ways. The second part was definitely much more, like you said, David, character development, but it left you hanging because it was just part one of it. I think that they might want to structure this a little differently in the future, make it like a whole episode of that second story, and then maybe just extend the first story a little bit longer. But I can see why they wanted to do that. But in terms of rating, David, what do you think you were going to give this episode for?
I would give it a seven, a dinner party
Mm-hmm.
for it, because like you said earlier, that we both agreed on, it's something enjoyable for those who are fans of it and discuss about nostalgia for the first part. But for the second part, it's like a preview that could have been saved for the next episode.
Yeah, I think that they could have done it a little better. I also would give it a seven dinner party because I think that the second story could have been as a preview. I think that if you remember the Phoenix Saga, that prequel story with the spirit drinker, that was a
Yeah.
really great story by itself. And it set up the Phoenix Saga in a lot of ways, but it was very separate and it was still very compelling. And you had compelling characters and it was some conflict. I remember that it was in prime time when it first came out. So it was built up to be really big. And I felt it could have been like that. So it's been done where they can have something that's really compelling for half an hour. But anyways, I just think that maybe in the future they could go with some other decision in terms of storytelling. Any other thoughts before we get into spoiler territory?
Let's dive
All
in.
right. So if you like our conversation about X-Men 97 and also future videos, please share and subscribe to our channel. Helps us out in the algorithm. And let's get right to it. Spoilers ahead. So we are going to some screenshots here, and we see that the first episode is called Motendo, which is a play on Nintendo, which is very interesting. You see Jubilee celebrating her 18th birthday. I think I saw some stuff online that in the previous episode she was in a club and she was underaged, and so I don't know why the club didn't get shut down because of it. But in any case, we see that Magneto's being a very wet blanket. She needs to train for the Danger Room, and she shouldn't be wasting her time celebrating her birthday while the other X-Men are gay. Should celebrate, and it's a moment for her. We end up seeing her sulking in her room with Roberto, actually. So they have a much stronger relationship than from the first episode. And we see that there was a video game system called Motendo that was there. And from that point on, all hell breaks loose, and we get to see the character Mojo from the original series. I have this like love-hate relationship with this character because it reminds me of Jabba the Hutt, Hollywood producer who's trying to break the fourth wall. What do you think of the return of Mojo here, David?
Honestly, when I saw him watching the episode, I'm thinking, oh my God, this guy. So he's like Deadpool, but
Right,
the thing is, Deadpool's more funny, and well, this one's more annoying.
right.
So he's trying to get himself more
Hmm.
seen, the whole intergalactic television
Right.
speak, since he tried to do a platform, which is video games. Hence, they somehow put a physical Mando in the real world and somehow hacked into Jubilee and Roberto's mind and got into the video game.
Right.
So,
And you can see that here as they get hacked in. And yeah, I think it was a very interesting premise, but I think Mojo is definitely one of those characters that I find him very obnoxious. And it's not one of my favorite characters, but I can understand why it's very appealing because he's entertaining and we get plugged into the Motendo and you see some of the graphics from the 90s with Jubilee and Roberto right there. And it says select, right? Yeah, select.
yeah, so like
So,
the character, yeah.
right.
What's interesting is that the whole setup is the exact same setup as the most popular X-Men game arcade way back in the 90s. Like you see in Chuck E. Cheese and other arcades like that. So I feel like I'm 12 or it was so popular at the time. So,
Yeah, I definitely remember playing that X-Men arcade game. That was pretty appealing, and also it happened around the same time as the original series. The video game premise was pretty interesting in some ways because it was playing Jubilee's life up to this point, and you get to be player one of her life. So it is very interesting to see those callbacks to when she was attacked by the Sentinels, when she went to the mall, when she went to Genosha. So it was pretty interesting to see all of those levels. And this was a very cool part here where it's like Street Fighter esque, where you're fighting the Sentinel. And a lot of the arcade games at the time really emulated this feel. I know that I played a lot of Ninja Turtles that had a very similar
oh
feel as
God,
well.
another classic,
Yeah,
yeah.
another classic. So Streets of Rage was another one that was very similar to this, where you have player one, player two, and you got go all the way to the big boss at the end, which happened to be Magneto. But then you saw during this time you had a lot of these glitches that happened, and she was wondering what is going on, and she had an opportunity to have an extra life because she was running out of life. And so we end up seeing an older version of Jubilee appeared and basically hacked her way through the levels. And very interesting character here, David. Maybe you could shed some light on what was her origin.
All right, this character is not the real
Mm-hmm.
Jubilee, because as Mojo explained it, he created other characters before hacking the real deal. Because Mojo made beta versions before inviting into the real game. Because Mojo explained that he has been studying them and making a digital copy of them into the game, hence beta. But somehow one of the beta versions escape and actually hack through the whole game and somehow get this older version of
Mm-hmm.
Jubilee. It's like a Tron-like copy of the
Mm-hmm.
character because during the game, the episode, Jubilee and Roberto were trying to fight their way through how to get out of the game, but then they were wondering who is helping them.
And also a very interesting side note that the actress who voiced Jubilee in the original series is the voice of this version of Jubilee. And so she was able to rescue them from the game and sent back to their reality, and they get very romantic and kiss at the very end. So we knew that there was going to be some type of romantic relationship between the two. So it was very interesting to see that payoff. So that was the end of the first half of the story. The second half of the story focused on Storm, and we saw from the end credits of the previous episode of her meeting with Forge, and we talked about Forge's affiliation with X Factor. We see Storm and Forge having some connection with each other, riding on horseback. And then we get to see this love tension that was happening between the two. I don't really get that. And then he professed that he loved her. And I just thought, wait a second, that's very fast. You just met this person. I didn't let it simmer. Yeah,
Fast.
exactly. Didn't let it simmer at all. And then it turns out he was working for X Factor and was one of the people that was responsible for the mutant power collars. So Storm slapped him in the face, said that he was responsible. And then at the very end of the episode, we see her face a demon like creature. But David, you have some thoughts on this scene?
Before I reveal that, let's
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit. They did a test, and unfortunately, they're doing an experiment with a machine that can help rehabilitate her powers, and they did a test
Yes.
fail, which unfortunately it failed. But during at the test, he was doing some tweaking and looking into the mutant control collar, and Storm happened to go in there. That's when Forge confessed to her about why he has it. Okay, a little backstory about Forge. Forge is a Native American who was drafted in during the Vietnam War, and after the war, he's going through PTSD, and then the government came to him that they'll help him unless they do something for him, as in creating these machines that can control mutants or at least subdue them. However, Forge did explain to Storm that his designs were actually modified from another inventor. It's Trask,
Yeah.
the one who made the Sentinels. It's him that created those in the first place. But Storm was so mad because he knew about this technology from the first place without even telling her in the beginning. But anyway, when Storm stormed off, no pun intended, and he was riding, she was caught by this demon-like creature called the adversary.
Mm-hmm.
It possesses supernatural powers like Ghost Rider or Blackheart, or even the Phoenix itself
Mm-hmm.
too. But the thing is, this adversary is actually summoned by Forge himself. The history is when Forge was in the Vietnam War, he was so depressed and very angry, so he summoned this creature to fight his enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But it backfire on him that he also tortures him due to his mental capabilities, and the adversary feeds off that negative emotions. Hence, he was interested in Storm because of her depression. So that's who this guy is.
Mm.
So.
Okay. Yeah, I was perplexed to see that, and I didn't know of the backstory of that character. We see New Mutants that had very similar demons, and also we saw Shadow King in the past with Storm. There's going to be a part 2. I think it comes out the week after next week. That's what I see online. But in any case, that's how it ended with this episode. So, any final thoughts before we wrap up this episode?
Just one. I hope that the next episode will tell more about Forge's backstory, because the one question when I saw this episode is, where was the X Factor team? Because he looked at a picture of the X Factor team that was seen at the original series. I thought he was at his base of operations, but this is in a house in Texas. Makes me think, were they disbanded?
Mm-hmm.
Will we see the X Factor team again?
Mm-hmm.
I really want to see the reunion between Scott and Alex Summers, aka Havoc. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. That's what we think of X-Men 97, the 4th episode. So I want to hear from you. Please share and subscribe for more content like this, and we will see you in the next video. All right. Talk to you soon.